Good morning, my friends. Well, for me, it's morning. In fact, it's morning in Fort Wayne, Indiana for me, because today for me is actually February 22nd, but we're not going to be taking these notes until February 29th. And I miss you today, but I'm getting the first series of shots in my neck, and it's going to make things better for me, which will make things better for you. All right, so today actually you have two topics, but you can put them in one set of Cornell notes. So I want you to title your Cornell notes Committees of Correspondence, Section 3 of E Pluribus Unum, and the second Mrs. Pines. The second set of notes, but it'll be together, is the First Continental Congress, and that's Section 4 of E Pluribus Unum. Remember that E Pluribus Unum means out of many, one. So go ahead and set up your notes, and let's rock and roll this little party of independence. Okay, first of all, truly, without communication, we would not have become a country. So without good communication. Communication is the key to success. And so as you see on the left hand of your screen, there's a copy of a letter clearly written by John Hancock, who was president of the Committee of Correspondence in Boston. He wrote a letter in April of 1775. It's actually April 12th, 1775, if you can look at the picture, from Concord. And it was about the need to raise a militia to protect the colonies from the British Redcoats. Now, and that letter was distributed throughout the Massachusetts colony and then from there to the rest of the colonies. So that's something that you really need to think about, is how they communicated. So let's talk about that. Looking at what I wrote on your slide, there were so many letters, pamphlets, and articles written about the situation in the American colonies about the British policies. Okay, and in those letters, pamphlets, and articles, the patriots were thinking about and considering what they should do about all of these laws. And they wrote very convincing arguments. Remember, some of those arguments were that we need to get along with Britain, but we've got to convince the British Parliament to respect us. But they were also radical and dangerous ideas floating out there about just breaking free from the colonies, from the British Parliament, and even fighting them. So some of these letters were actually quite dangerous, because if they'd fallen into the British government hands, the people who wrote them, like John Hancock, would be considered traitors. And John Hancock, as we know, was considered a traitor. So, they had no internet in the 1770s. They couldn't do what I'm doing right now. So what they did was they formed these committees of correspondence. Correspondence means to talk back and forth via writing, to correspond with each other. That radical, Sam Adams, was the one who came up with this idea. He formed the first committee. Adams set up this plan to have pamphlets, letters, and articles shared to the rest of Massachusetts using the British Postal Service. Can you believe that? If the people who had been delivering those letters opened them and looked at them, Sam would have been in a lot of trouble, because these ideas were very radical. He sent the info out to designated people in the different communities throughout Massachusetts, and they shared their documents with the rest of the community by holding meetings, like the one Moses Cooper was going to with Joseph Simmons in April morning. So, in fact, if you remember, when they're talking about the battle, Adam is surprised that one militia member even has a notebook with him. Well, that notebook was to take notes so that they could write letters about what was going on and distribute that to the rest of the colonies. Pretty smart when you think about it. Very brave, very radical. So we have this going on at first in Massachusetts. Massachusetts is really where it all starts, because of course Massachusetts is where Britain really brought down their hammer of the law. All right, so as the other colonies watched Massachusetts, they followed their lead. The Committee of Correspondence in Boston did more than just write down and share ideas that they sent out. They supported political action. They actually, in their letters, endorsed the Boston Tea Party, with the raid on the Dartmouth, that's the name of the ship that they burned, was proposed. So they actually did more than just write about what was going on. They held meetings and voted on what should they do, okay, and what should they support. And soon, that really important colony, Virginia, in Jamestown, their House of Burgesses established a formal committee of correspondence in 1773 as part of their legislative process. So it became a formal committee. that exists to this day. Other colonies soon followed suit. And in many ways, our nation was conceived because, oh my goodness, I have a typo. I'll see if I can fix that. Because I have two of them, without communication, you cannot have unity. All right? Today, we can go online to www.congress.gov. Be careful, make sure you follow that link correctly. And if you want to, you can type in the word correspondence and you will see all of the notes of what our legislators are doing. Fair warning, it's a lot. Remember, when I say legislators, I'm talking about our senators and our representatives in the House of Representatives. Okay? So, the reason I put these two lectures together is because the committees of correspondence lead to the First Continental Congress, okay? Now, but we have to go backwards for a moment, and we have to go back over the Intolerable Acts because the Intolerable Acts resulted in political action like the colonies had never seen before. So let's review these. The Intolerable Acts are the Quartering Act that required the colonial authorities to furnish barracks and supplies to the British troops. In 1766, it was expanded to public houses and unoccupied buildings. Then there's the Boston Port Bill of June 1774. This bill closed the port of Boston to all colonists until the damages from the Tea Party were paid off. The Administration of Justice Act in May of 1774 said that British officials could not be tried in provincial courts for capital crimes. So they could murder you and then go to London and they could get tried there. But the reality is, because they were extradited back to Britain, but the courts there would let them off because there was no evidence from the colonists about what had happened. The Massachusetts Government Act in May of 1774 annulled, did away with, got rid of the Charter of the Colonies, giving the British governor complete control of the town meetings. So if it wasn't okay with the British governor, you weren't supposed to be having a meeting. And then, of course, the Quebec Act that extended the Canadian borders to cut off the western colonies of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Virginia, and endorsed a Catholic colony. Okay, so we see those Intolerable Acts. We know the committees of correspondence are talking about them. So let's see what happens that leads to the First Continental Congress. So they had to set up this meeting, and they do. They set it up for September of 1774. And if you think about it, it is so hard to organize a conference today. And we have tons of technology to do it. And trust me, I've organized a conference in the past when I worked at UTEP. And it was hard to do that. Can you imagine what it must have taken back then when they didn't have the internet or telephones or email? But the committees of correspondence did it. They were brave. They persevered. They had endurance. They're really, truly people to look up to. They sent messages to every colonial assembly. Remember, that's the legislature. And they organized the First Continental Congress. Everyone but Georgia sent a delegation of representatives to this intercolonial meeting in Philadelphia to talk about the Intolerable Acts and what they should do about the way the government had been treating the colonists. Remember, there was a Staff Act Congress 10 years before, and only 9 of 13 colonies went to that. So this is progress that 12 of 13 are there. So we have this meeting. Let's see what happens at that meeting. So we have the First Continental Congress, and as you can see in the picture, that's the painting, that's a depiction of the colonists coming together to protest the Intolerable Acts. Sending delegates kind of was done by whim, because remember, because of the act that said that they couldn't hold meetings because the assemblies had been done away with, they had to kind of go around and have secret meetings and figure out who to send to this meeting. Okay, it's almost done by whim, but not so much. I think it was more than by whim. I think that they went around and found people who they knew would be the best representatives at this meeting. Okay, so even with such barriers, the natural leaders seemed to be reached by the committees of correspondence, and they went to Philadelphia. Some of the attendees, and those of you doing fake books, need to think about this, about these people. You need to look and see, was your fake book person at the First Continental Congress? So some of the attendees were John and Sam Adams of Massachusetts, Richard Henry Lee, George Washington, and Patrick Henry of Virginia, and John Dickinson of Pennsylvania. There were more. So they met at Carpenter's Hall in Philadelphia. Remember, Philadelphia is that hotbed of equality and religious freedom that we learned about when we looked at the Enlightenment's influence on the colonies. the delegates had to struggle with the question of how to get Parliament to listen to them. One idea proposed by Joseph Galloway of Pennsylvania was to create an imperial union with Britain, wherein the colonies would form an American assembly that had to approve all acts of the British Parliament. In other words, they would have representation. But it would be more than representation. It would be like they would have a huge vote in it by saying, we're almost equal to the British Parliament. But the colonial delegates voted this down by one vote. A very different world might exist had this passed. Okay, so instead what happened was the colonists agreed to send King George III in Parliament a letter declaring that the colonies had the right to representation, and the letter was ignored. The delegates also planned to meet, this is very, very important, the delegates also planned to meet again in May of 1775. This planning of another meeting showed that an intercolonial union had been formed. And that, my friends, is so important to the fact that we exist as a nation today, because they agreed that they had to work together as one. Unfortunately, they didn't know it at that moment when they planned this meeting that we're going to come back together again. But that meeting would talk about the shots fired at Concord and Lexington. Our next topic will be the Second Continental Congress, and we'll keep rolling forward in our study of the Revolution. You know what to do. Collaborate, my friends. And I shouldn't even have to say it, right? Write questions and write your summaries and look at how this plays into your fake book. Thank you. I miss you.